I never understood how a morning could be so calm, so deceptively peaceful, and still carry within it the seed of the worst day of your life. Perhaps that is the cruelest truth about history. Disaster rarely announces itself with thunder. Most of the time, it walks in quietly, dressed in sunlight. December 7th, 1941 began for me long before the world caught fire. I woke before the other men, as I always did, not because I enjoyed early mornings, but because the Navy had a way of drilling habits into you until free will became optional. The barracks were warm and stuffy, thick with the mingled smells of sweat, boot polish, and the lingering hint of someone's cheap aftershave. Rows of bunks formed uneven lines of sleeping bodies, some sprawled, some curled, some buried under blankets like they were trying to hide from another day of military routine. The first light of dawn filtered through the slatted windows, drawing faint stripes across the floorboards. I lay still for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the early hour settle over me. Outside, I could hear distant gulls and the soft slap of water against the harbor walls. It sounded like any other Sunday. Familiar. Safe. The kind of morning that almost convinces you that nothing bad could possibly happen. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet touching the cool floor, and stretched the stiffness from my shoulders. My uniform hung from a nail on the wall, pressed as best as I could manage the night before, though the tropical humidity always had its way with the fabric. I dressed slowly, savoring those few moments of silence before the day properly began. Stepping outside, I inhaled deeply. The air was still cool from the night, carrying a faint ocean tang. Across the harbor, the silhouettes of our battleships stood proud and immovable. The Arizona, the Oklahoma, the California, mighty names attached to mighty steel. Their hulls reflected the sunrise like mirrors of polished iron. I always felt comforted seeing them lined up like that. They were our guardians, our proof that we were strong, that fate could shake us but never shatter us. That I wish I could go back and warn that version of myself. Grab him by the shoulders and tell him that peace is always fragile, that safety is a thin illusion stretched over a restless world. But time does not work that way. It never has. I walked toward the mess hall, boots crunching over gravel, and nodded at a few early risers who were either too disciplined or too restless to sleep in. Inside, the mess smelled of stale bread and burnt coffee. I poured myself a cup, wincing at the metallic bitterness but sipping anyway because comfort is sometimes found in routine, even when the routine tastes like boiled nails. I sat alone by the window, the harbor visible through the glass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a letter to my mother I'd started the day before. I skimmed what I had written. A mix of small jokes, small complaints, and a few lines meant to reassure her that I was doing fine, that Navy life was steady, predictable. I dipped my pen into the ink and continued writing. I described the early morning drills, the ridiculous arguments between bunkmates, the lousy coffee. I was about to write something sentimental, something I would have quickly crossed out, when a distant rumble trembled through the AI or T first. I barely noticed it. Could have been anything. A truck backfiring, a training exercise, even thunder. Then it came again, louder this time. The windows rattled in their frames. My pen paused mid-stroke. The third sound was unmistakable. A shrill, tearing whistle cut through the morning, a sound so foreign, so violently out of place, that my heart lurched against my ribs. The explosion hit like a giant's hammer. The floor trembled, coffee sloshed out of my cup, and someone shouted from across the hall. More men ran outside, their faces twisted in confusion. I followed, my legs instinctively quickening, though my mind lagged behind, clinging to disbelief. The moment I stepped outside, the world split open and a monstrous column of smoke and fire shot upward from the direction of Battleship Row. The blast echoed across the harbor, hitting my chest like a physical blow. A second explosion followed, then a third. The sky filled with thick black plumes that twisted like infernal serpents. That I was still trying to process what I was seeing when a formation of planes roared overhead. Dozens of them. Sleek, black, fast. For a heartbeat I thought they were ours. Training exercise? Maneuvers? But then the rising sun emblem flashed on their wings, bright and unmistakable. Japanese aircraft. Attacking Pearl Harbor. Reality locked into place with the precision of a bullet entering a chamber. The first wave dove toward the battleships, unleashing bombs that trailed white smoke as they fell. I watched in frozen horror as one struck the Arizona, triggering a fireball so large it seemed to swallow the morning sun. The shock wave knocked men off their feet. The ship shuddered violently, engulfed in flames and debris. Slaps on my shoulder, someone yelling my name, broke the paralysis. Instinct replaced thought. I ran. Bullets stitched the ground around me, spraying dirt and splinters. A Zero strafed the path, its guns blazing, and I dove behind a sandbag wall. The air vibrated with the roar of engines, the screams of men, the thunder of exploding steel, and then came the torpedo bombers, flying low. So low I could have thrown a stone at them. They skimmed across the water toward the battleships. Torpedoes detached cleanly, leaving trails of white foam as they sped toward their targets. The Oklahoma shuddered as one struck her hull. Another hit the West Virginia. A third plowed into the California. Water surged upward in frothy geysers. The Oklahoma began to roll, slowly at first, like a wounded animal trying to regain its balance. But the water rushed in too fast. Her massive weight shifted, groaned, tilted. Sailors scrambled across the deck, sliding, stumbling, some leaping desperately into the water. I watched, helpless, as the great ship capsized, her keel rising into the air like the belly of a dead whale. The screams of trapped men pounding on the hull would follow me for decades. I sprinted toward a group of sailors attempting to man an anti-aircraft gun. Halfway there, a bomb detonated nearby. The blast lifted me off my feet and slammed me into the ground, driving the breath from my lungs. My ears rang violently. The world blurred into a smear of smoke, fire, and ground that rocked like a ship at sea. When my vision cleared, I saw fire everywhere. The harbor water had transformed into a thick black slick of burning oil. Flames danced across its surface, licking at the bodies floating beneath. Some men were alive, thrashing, screaming, trying to swim through fire. Others drifted silently, face down. Another wave of planes shrieked overhead. More bombs, more destruction. The sky looked like a storm of black wings and death. I staggered to my feet, coughing up smoke. A sailor stumbled past me, half his face burned, babbling that the Arizona had exploded, that men were dying everywhere. His terror fueled my own legs into motion. I joined a group hauling hoses toward the inferno engulfing the West Virginia. We sprayed seawater across the flames, but it felt like trying to douse a volcano with a bucket. The heat seared my eyebrows, dried my throat, and filled my mouth with the taste of ash. A shard of metal whistled past my ear and embedded itself in a wooden crate behind me. The sailor next to me fell suddenly, a neat hole through his helmet. I dropped beside him, instinctively reaching for a pulse I already knew wasn't there. No time. No time for anything. We ran to the docks again. The Maryland had taken a hit, and several sailors were trapped inside a partially collapsed compartment. Smoke poured from the opening. Without thinking, I followed two others into the gap, holding my breath. Inside, heat clung to the walls, making every movement feel like wading through fire. We found 3 men unconscious. One was pinned beneath a collapsed beam, his leg twisted unnaturally. It took all 3 of us to lift the beam just enough to drag him free. By the time we stumbled outside, our lungs were screaming for air. We laid the wounded on the ground. One of them, the youngest, grabbed my sleeve and begged me not to let him die. His eyes were huge, terrified. I told him he wouldn't. I lied. I didn't know. The attack continued, wave after wave. Bombs, torpedoes, machine gun fire. The air soaked in blood and smoke. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost form, became a twisted ribbon of chaos. I remember dragging bodies. I remember helping medics apply tourniquets. I remember the metallic taste of fear and the burning sting of smoke-filled eyes. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, the attack tapered off, planes dwindled, engines faded, the sky emptied, and an unbearable silence settled over Pearl Harbor, a silence broken only by the crackle of flames, the groans of collapsing metal, and the moans of the wounded. I stood at the water's edge, staring at the ruins. The harbor, once a proud cradle of American naval strength, had been transformed into a floating graveyard. The Arizona was still burning fiercely, her deck torn apart. The Oklahoma lay overturned. The California was sinking. Smoke spiraled upward in thick, oily columns. Bodies floated among the wreckage. Some burned, some intact, all heavy with the same stillness that I would forever associate with that day that my legs gave out, and I sank onto a crate, trembling violently. Someone draped a blanket around my shoulders. I didn't see who. My eyes were fixed on the devastation before me. The sun set behind a veil of smoke, staining the sky with a deep, hellish red. The fires reflected on the water like shattered mirrors, and I realized something then. Something cold, sharp, and irreversible. The world had changed. We had changed. The illusion of invincibility was gone, burned away in 2 hours of fire and steel that I would carry that day with me for the rest of my life. Every scream, every explosion, every face. Some memories fade, soften around the edges, but not this. Not Pearl Harbor. It carved itself into me, an inscription of fire on the inside of my skull. For years afterward, I kept silent about much of what I saw, not because I wanted to forget. Forgetting was impossible, but because I feared that speaking about it might somehow dishonor the dead, or worse, cheapen the truth of what happened. But some truths demand to be told. This is mine. I was there when the sky shattered. I was there when steel melted, when ships capsized like toys, when the harbor burned like the mouth of hell. I felt the heat on my skin, tasted the ash in my throat, watched young men die with prayers on their lips, and I survived, not thanks to bravery, but by some random mercy that spared me while others fell. Survival is its own burden. The weight never leaves you, not really. But carrying it is the least I can do for those who never walked away from that morning. This is my testimony. My secret no longer